Bailey Books, Levels and Terms, Master Chart Update 3/6/2024 with Explanations of Changes by Dr. Lisa Love. Progression of Charts over Time. 2016, the initial chart. One of the most frustrating things about diving into the Alice Bailey books is how massively complex the model of spiritual development is. In her books, there is no attempt to help beginners slowly walk their way into her model. Rather, the books are written as if you are already well versed in the model, kind of like the author expects you to know advanced calculus, even though you may be struggling with beginning algebra. Having spent literally 4.5 decades now reading and rereading these books, I felt I finally had a decent understanding of the overall model. That inspired my first attempt in 2016 to organize the model so it could become more accessible and coherent. In 2010, I had already compiled more than 500 pages on what the various initiations or expansions of consciousness were. I'd been interested in that topic since I did something called Stages of Spiritual Growth already in the 1990s as an audio series. Now in 2016, I did more compilations on the terms I was using in the chart presented here. Then I was using the newer technology that existed to cut, paste, and organize the material as never before. And the end result was this first chart that I published on the soultospirit.com website. To understand what I was doing, here is an example of what the desktop might look like when I do this work. As I work, I zoom in and out from the main thesis in the middle to check my assumptions based on what each text had to say about what I was exploring. So you can see, for example, that if I was working on a slide, I would put that in the middle, or if I was working on a chart, I would put that in the middle, and then I would take text from the Bailey books that I had excerpted, and sometimes I would highlight in red key points related to the term I was working with and surround that text with what I was working on in terms of in the middle. Now, this is a made-up one. This is not an example of what I really did. This just is what I made up to do this slide. But then I would have different versions of different charts. Obviously, this is this slide with the original chart, but I would have different versions of different charts, different text, original charts from the Bailey books, and I would simply move around, zoom in and out to try and get a better understanding of whether what I was doing in this chart was accurate or not. Reviewing the text, as I just said, I would cut, paste, arrange, and rearrange concepts related to a specific term. Then I dumped that term into various versions of charts, compared what I had done to other charts, and so forth. In short, the new technology finally helped my seventh ray mind's lifelong, almost compulsive need to organize things into an orderly pattern. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the seventh ray mind, when I used to do 7-ray seminars with Michael Robbins, I was taught by him, and then I taught a few with him. I would always argue with him about how his assumption that I had a third-ray mind did not fit, because I would always draw pictures as if I was throwing out the marbles, all the different options, and then slowly pulling all those marbles together into an organized, systematic fashion. That's exactly what I'm doing here. Now, I did find in one of Michael Robbins' Tapestry of the Gods books on the 7 rays that he did mention that when we get on the spiritual path, we are more likely to have a 7th ray mind. And so I have finally claimed mine. After I created this first chart, I had a major breakthrough. For decades, I had read and reread, as I already told you, the books, including having taught the book Esoteric Psychology 2 a few times to 2 different groups of people. But suddenly, while rereading this text, Esoteric Psychology 2, it sunk into my mind what a few pages in that text were saying that I had not fully comprehended before. The pages were 203 to 207, if you want to look them up yourself, that talked about 10 soul groups. Because I understood the Bailey material so much better than I had decades earlier when teaching this book to others, and because I had been following what the integral community, originally started by Ken Wilber and others, had been doing for decades, I decided to imitate the spiral dynamics idea of colors with Bailey's 10 soul groups. That began my revelation of how to finally organize the Bailey material in a way that made more sense, allowing it to become more accessible to those who wanted to study her material. I also began a website that was originally called Wisdom versus Wilbur in 2016 that is now called soul2spirit.com to show the comparisons between the Bailey and integral model. Over the next 2 years, from 2016 to 2018, I continued my compilation effort. Now that I had some sort of chart to work with, getting a map of the Bailey books became easier. It even helped me understand more about what terms meant as I continued to reread her many books. Still, at times, I remained frustrated, as Bailey does not always use one term to mean one thing. For example, when she uses the word aspirant, it can mean the stage of aspirant, which is equivalent to her Group 6 soul group, so I started calling it the Group 6 aspirant, or it can mean anyone who is aspiring to be spiritual at any level of the spiritual path. Likewise, when you see the word disciple, it can mean a probationary disciple, an accepting disciple, a pledged disciple, an accepted disciple, an initiated disciple, or all disciples at every level. And maybe you are shaking your head in frustration right now the way I frequently did. However, it is my hope that some sort of chart or map like the one I have been continuously refining for 8 years now will help you read the books and discern how any term is being used within a certain text. Eventually, after 2 years was over, I ended up creating this 2018 chart. As you can see, this chart reflects my growing attempt to compare the Bailey model and the integral model. So, for example, here are the colors used in integral that were invented by spiral dynamics that were later blended into the integral system. I was trying to imitate colors myself, so I put my colors there. These colors are not found in the Bailey books. This is my innovation, and later you will see in this video I dropped this. Here were the different levels and terms I was working with: the petals of the egoic lotus, the 10 groups that I mentioned that were found in Esoteric Psychology Volume 2, the various names that I was finding throughout the Bailey books: aspirant, probationary disciple, accepting disciple, accepted disciple, and so forth. The Chela names, the 6 Chela names that are mentioned in one of the Dinah books, Discipleship in the New Age books. Here I was taking the many different initiations and trying to associate them with the subplanes in her model, the rules found in Initiation Human and Solar and Rays and Initiations, and the techniques of spiritual growth known as the Eclair model found in Esoteric Psychology Volume 2. As I was doing this comparison, however, between integral and the Bailey books, I was beginning to see how the two models did not fit together. In the integral model, it seems to indicate that humanity is becoming more intellectually and spiritually aware as they move into orange, green, teal, and so forth. So in other words, just good times seem to be ahead of us. But in the Bailey model, humanity's next step of progress, and it is a stage forward, it's not a stage backward, it's an evolution. The next step of progress is moving into what is known as an integrated personality, which you will see in later charts I renamed Group 6 Materialist, and I'll explain why I did that later. Group 6 Materialist are more intellectual than the masses of humanity, but they're still focused on the world of the 5 senses, dominated by desire, and have reached the heights of selfishness, and are focused on gaining power in the outer world. Now, their intellectual nature is still full of kama manas, desire, kama, mind, manas. And so that colors their ability to truly see things accurately. And that's something that a lot of them don't admit to or don't even know. So like teenagers in fast cars, they think they know more than they do, leading to reckless behavior. In this teenager or young adult phase of human evolution, integrated personalities may become a real danger in our world, leading potentially, as some Bailey books stress, to the worldwide rise of authoritarianism and dictatorship. In fact, she ends her book Externalization of the Hierarchy by emphasizing that we must defeat totalitarianism. Why does she do that? Because I believe that that book is emphasizing what the other books are saying, that with the rise of the Group 6 materialist, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, dictatorships, which she also mentions this in Esoteric Psychology Volume 2, are going to be a real challenge for us in our future. Counterbalancing this potential rise of dictatorships, etc., by helping people to evolve spiritually, by getting them to move into groups 7, 8, and 9, is the major thrust of Bailey's books. That's the conclusion I have arrived at in studying this teaching. Rereading her books, I also came to understand more clearly what Bailey meant when she indicated that most of humanity is dominated by what she calls Atlantean consciousness. See Esoteric Psychology Volume 2, especially at the start of that book, though other books mention this as well, as I've discovered when doing a compilation on this phrase. So she talks about at the beginning of that book, Lemurian consciousness, Atlantean consciousness, so forth. And I did a compilation on Atlantean consciousness and Lemurian consciousness and all these different terms, and was reading and rereading these different compilations as I was doing these charts. So Atlantean consciousness, by the way, has nothing to do with Atlantis or some race known as the Atlanteans. Bailey stresses. You can see that at the beginning of Esoteric Psychology Volume 2. Instead, it has to do with a level of consciousness that resides on the emotional plane. Bailey states specifically that Atlantean consciousness involves groups 3, 4, 5, and 6, which is why they went on to the emotional plane in my later charts. I do not have the planes here in this 2018 chart, but you'll see the planes appear here later. Now, Bailey stresses in Esoteric Psychology Volume 2 that the majority of humanity is group 5, then 4, then 3, which, for those of you that love integral, there is a close parallel between Amber Expert and group 5, Amber group 4, and Red group 3. The problem with these soul groups is that they are dominated by their desires, and their minds are heavily colored by emotional reactions. Borrowing a term from the integral community, they are mythological in their thinking, wanting a Superman or a strongman or superhero to rescue them, which explains to me why we see so many superhero movies dominating just about every movie out there, and why so much of groups 3, 4, and 5 are looking for group 6 materialists, who tend to be the dictators, to rescue them. And group 6 materialists are taking advantage of this, something that will become, in the Bailey model, an increasing problem in the centuries to come, as group 6, as Bailey states, becomes the emerging group. That is something that was shocking for me to be aware of, but the more I've sat with it since I learned about it in 2016 and look out there in the world and what's happening, the more it really fits for me. 2 more years seems to be what I do every 2 years. I update this chart. My understanding that some of the people in Bailey's Soul Group 6 are aspirational to spiritual life, less selfish, and can even be humanitarian, and some are selfish and dictatorial as integrated personalities, led to another change reflected in this chart. What you see here is me splitting Group 6 into 3 levels to try to talk about some distinct characteristics leading from very selfish to less selfish, but that became cumbersome. So later this idea was dumped, and I stuck more to Bailey's phrases of integrated personality and aspirant, which again I later called Group 6 materialists and Group 6 aspirants. So let's see if I can find that in this chart. you'll notice it in this column here, how I had these different groups split into things, and I was calling things A, B, ABC, etc. here. That is dumped in later renditions. You will also see now that I'm starting to put the planes here, so you can more easily see how the vast groups of humanity are on the emotional plane and so forth. There have been changes made to this, so hang in there with me. And you'll also see that I was reducing where integrals different people were at. Now, I would probably change that again. I don't agree with what I have now in this 2020 chart, but I was still hung out, tripping out on this idea of trying to fit the two models together. And actually, if I did this again now in 2024, it would not look like this. I can tell you that by just me glancing at it at this moment. You will also see in this chart that I was still on the kick of trying to compare this model to integral. I just said all that. I even added my own list of colors to the Bailey chart, which I had already done, and I was trying to refine them even more. And personally, I was never too keen on this idea. So as you will see, it fell away in later models. Part of that was because to get different colors, I was using the chakra system, and the Bailey books don't agree that these colors are not exact to what the Bailey model might say. But I was imitating the chakra system colors. And eventually I will do an upgraded chart, maybe 2026, with the colors more correct to what the Bailey books would say that they were. But I was interested with that, and I was looking at the different colors, and to get them right, I was looking online and looking at different gradations of colors that artists use, and some of the names I just didn't like. I didn't like calling a group pumpkin, etc. I did it, but as I was doing it, I really didn't like the idea. And as I just mentioned, you will see in this version that I was attempting to add the planes, and then I was even adding the subplanes by I had broke them into, at this point, their own column here. So we had subplanes, colors, the groups, the evolutionary names, the petals, the Chela names, the techniques, the initiations, and the rules. However, based on bits and pieces of information collected in my various compilations on all these terms, I could see that some of these subplanes could be inferred. What I'm saying here, I was seeing that you could start to take all of these terms, not just the initiations, and try and put them on various subplanes. So I was playing with that idea more sincerely here. Because they could be inferred, I went for it. And the nice thing about this approach is that I can begin to read horizontally more, which is really nice. And as we get to the final chart, I invite you to pause and start to read horizontally what the different terms may be and how they're connected together. That helped me get a better understanding of what these subplanes might be like regarding how consciousness might operate on the subplanes. Still, as you will see in this video, my placement of what belonged where on various subplanes changed over the years as my understanding of the model deepened. So now comes the 2022 chart. And why does it have a black background? Because for some weird reason, my computer changed all my backgrounds to black. And it took me a long time to figure out how to change it back to white, which I finally did. But anyway, this one looks kind of dramatic with a black background. 2 years later, once again, this chart, the 2022 chart, emerged. Here I dropped the colors and the comparison between Wilbur and the Bailey models. I also felt more comfortable with the chart that I was using, especially as I began to work on a series of books. And here are all the different books that I have done. 6 of these are done. The rest are outlined, and eventually I will have all 12 books done, 1 intro, 1 summary book of the 10 soul groups. But you can get 6 of them now if you want to purchase them, or you can become a patron, doing a little plug, if you want to help me continue to feel motivated to get them finished. My patrons really help put the pressure on me. They put 0 pressure on me, but the fact that they're there and they contribute, even though I only have a handful of them, is the main thing that inspires me to keep going. So shout out to my patrons, because without you, I don't think I would be persisting in this work. Even if you only give me $5 a month, it's really, really valuable to me. And again, I only have a handful of people, but those handful of people are what keep me going in this work. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being my patron. Now we're going to come to the Bailey integral map. Though my 2022 chart had dropped the integral model comparison, I still had a deep appreciation for what the integral community was doing. And I have been a subscriber to them, and I follow them. I've been to a couple of their online conferences, etc. And I especially have a lot of respect for this A-qual map that they put together. There's some really innovative things that they were doing here that I still have deep appreciation for. That inspiration, and maybe even a little bit of envy, led to the creation of my Bailey integral map that paralleled the integral A-qual map to some degree. This Bailey integral map also included something I had found in a few paragraphs that I had not paid enough attention to before, about 6 levels of mind in the Bailey books. Here she discusses 3 levels of mind on the emotional plane and 3 levels of mind on the mental plane. And to my surprise, I came to understand that there were 2 levels of lower concrete mind. One that she said existed on the emotional plane and one on the mental plane. To explain Bailey's integral map and the 6 levels of mind, I produced videos on them that can be found on my Soul to Spirit YouTube channel. So here are the 6 levels of mind, but I don't want to get into details about what they are. Instinctual mind, lower concrete mind, and personality mind on the emotional plane, lower concrete mind, the son of mind, and the abstract mind on the mental plane. So now we're going to go to the 2024 chart upgrades. And before I do, I'm just going to mention that I made an entire video on that Bailey integral map that you can see on the Soul to Spirit website if you want to get the details of how I showed how those maps, the integral map and the Bailey map, line up. In the second half of 2023, once again, I decided to go through the Bailey books and my compilations again to refine my 2022 chart. So it's my 2-year thing, I guess. Here then is the 2024 chart and my latest understanding. To help you see the changes made, I decided to reveal them in this video. Before, I've just simply put the new chart up on the Soul to Spirit website and just let people know it's out there, and I've never explained why I've done what I've done. So I decided in this video to explain my changes. There's a lot of them. Here we go. But first, a reminder, as anyone who has followed me now for 8 years, I always encourage people to take what I have done in an open-minded way. Though I believe I'm getting closer to the final version of this chart, as this video has already shown, the highly complex Bailey books are notorious for having highly important keys to the model buried somewhere that can easily be overlooked, like 6 types of mind and 10 soul groups, just a few pages, and your whole understanding of the model has to be shifted and rearranged. That means I encourage anyone who finds something that contradicts what I am sharing with you to share what you have found with me and the rest of us, so our understanding of this model can continue to evolve. That said, let's look at the changes in the 2024 chart and my reasons for making them in this video. So the first thing you'll see is that I added a level. So what I did is I added the lowest subplane of the Boudic plane to the chart. Now, any of you familiar with Bailey know that there are 7 planes of consciousness, and this chart is focusing primarily on the emotional and mental plane. So I haven't put the physical plane much, a little bit down here. And actually in this chart, I almost thought of dropping it, but I decided to keep it. But then this is the emotional plane, this is the mental plane, both the lower mental plane and the higher mental plane. But I have omitted the Boudic planes and the Atmic planes, the monadic planes, the logoic planes, in the Bailey model. Why? Because the 10 soul groups do not connect to them. But I do feel at this point that the 10th soul group connects to the Boudic plane, as do a couple other terms that are being used. So I added this subplane of the Boudic plane to my chart here. My concerns over doing this? I don't have any. My rationale for doing this? See the comments, especially under the heading of techniques later in this video, for the real understanding of why that change was made. And we'll look at that more later. Next, I put in a new column, a column on the senses. So here's that new column on the senses. My concerns over doing this? None. My rationale for doing this? All the words in the senses column are given by Bailey and assigned to the various subplanes by her. The senses on the physical plane are just simply the 5 senses we're used to. On the emotional plane, these senses are thought to be lower psychic powers, most likely because there is not enough mind in place to assess how accurate these powers are to see if they are reliable, repeatable, and predictable in a scientific manner. That's why most psychic powers are made fun of. There's a lot of solipsism involved as well. I see this thing clairvoyantly, but then we just have to assume that you're right. We don't have the ability to bring in other clairvoyants and all of them look at the same thing and get a true scientific assessment to see if that is really what's going on or just what's in that one individual's perception. On the mental plane, these powers tend to be explored more scientifically and are much more provable, reliable, predictable, and accurate. As we go up the mental plane, what is interesting to note is that these powers include words that do not even sound psychic, such as the words discrimination, spiritual discernment, and more. And we'll come back to that, but you see the words discrimination, spiritual discernment here. Now, these senses continue to be listed higher up on the Boudic plane and even the Atmic plane. And you can go to the Soul to Spirit website and do a quick search on psychic powers, and you'll get the detailed articles that I put there of how these powers work on all the various planes here. I also added the column on the mind types that I mentioned before, the 6 types of mind. So here's the addition of the mind types column. My concerns doing this. Though Bailey mentions the 6 types of mind, she does not put them on specific subplanes, so putting them on the subplanes I have is my invention. My rationale for doing this, I feel reasonably comfortable with how I've assigned these based on a lot of documentation from the Bailey books. Here then are the types of mind distributed on the emotional plane and on the mental plane. And you can freeze this if you want and kind of take a look at them. Instinctual, lower concrete mind, personality mind, and sometimes I have them blended together here. And then the same thing, blending personality mind and lower concrete mind on the mental plane, and then the sun of mind, which is a reference to when we get to the soul. We're kind of a mixture before we get to the third subplane where the soul is, a mixture of abstract mind, sun of mind, and then the abstract mind, and then up in the Boudic plane, I just simply put intuition. Now let's look at some changes on the subplanes that I have made. So the first thing I did is I shifted groups 1 and 2 onto subplanes 6 and 7 of the emotional plane. Originally, I had group 1 down here at the highest level of the physical plane. But with greater understanding, I believe now it goes to the bottom level of the emotional plane. And that would shift then group 2, which had been at the bottom level of the emotional plane, the 7th subplane of the emotional plane. There are 7 subplanes on each plane. 1, 2, 3, well, let me get my little highlighter here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 On the mental plane, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This would be the first on the physical plane. There would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the seventh on the buddhic plane. If we went up, there would be 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So there are 7 subplanes on each of the major planes here. And the mental plane is broken into the plane of the lower mind. Notice she doesn't say the concrete mind. It's the lower mind. I think that's deliberate because there are 2 lower concrete minds, one on the emotional plane, one on the mental plane in her books, and then the plane of the higher mind, or the solar angel, she calls it. And here's that final shift of group 2 up onto the 6th subplane of the emotional plane. I have put it now. My concerns about doing this. Well, group 1 is said to have Lemurian consciousness. To help me understand Lemurian consciousness, as I mentioned long ago, I created a compilation of what the Bailey book said about it. And again, Bailey states that when she talks about Lemurians in her book, she's not talking about a race of people, but a state of consciousness that has Lemurian tendencies. As Bailey tells us, Lemurian consciousness is focused only on physical survival and the coordination of the physical body. For this reason, I initially thought they belonged to the physical plane, but since then I have a different view. My rationale for this change. According to Theosophy, humans learned to coordinate their physical bodies during the Lemurian race, which is said to have disappeared a long time ago, some say millions of years ago. For this reason, it did not make sense to me to put Group 1, who's supposedly still in existence in really small numbers, on the physical plane. Though Groups 1 and 2 are still heavily focused on physical survival, they're not learning to coordinate the physical body. Now, just because somebody has a physical disability doesn't mean they're in Groups 1 and 2. Don't get that confused. This is about level of consciousness, not about the condition of a physical body and if somebody has a disability. So Groups 1 and 2, they're not learning to coordinate the physical body. They may or may not have a physical disability. They may be fine physically, but they're not worried about that level of evolution. They also seem to have some emotional awareness, though it's limited in scope, and for this reason, I shifted these groups up a level. See my videos on Groups 1 and 2 on this Soul to Spirit YouTube channel, and my books. I have a book on each group if you want to learn more. So when I shifted those groups up, I had to shift other groups up as well. Here, we now have Group 3, 4, and 5 have all been shifted up a level from the original. Originally, this would have been Groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6A, 6B, 6C, later 6A and B, etc. That's the old chart. Now it's just Groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the difference here. My concerns for doing this? None. My rationale for doing this? As a reminder, the Bailey books do not assign the 10 soul groups to subplanes. They simply state that Group 3 is a mixture of Lemurian and Atlantean consciousness, and Groups 4 and 5 are Atlantean consciousness. And so it just started to make more sense to me to have them shifted up. Again, those with Atlantean consciousness are dominated by emotion and desire. So it makes sense that they all exist on the emotional plane. And when I shifted Groups 1 and 2 up, I had to shift Groups 3, 4, and 5 up as well. Now, part of the advantage of doing that is that Groups 5, 4, and 3, which are the majority of humanity, are more firmly in the middle of the emotional plane. So the Group 6 materialist occupies only subplane 2 on the emotional plane. As a reminder, I had put them on a few planes, but now they're no longer here. They are only here. As a reminder, maybe I could have called it Group 6 integrated personality, and that would have fit better with Bailey's model because she does distinguish an integrated personality from an aspirant. But to me, the word materialist was just shorter, and it just implies more what they're really about. They're heavily materialistic and focused on the outer world and dominating the outer world so they can get all their desires met. And so that is my invention here, just to reaffirm that. My concerns taking the Group 6 materialist integrated personalities only onto one subplane now, I don't have any. My rationale for doing this: in my previous versions of the chart, as I mentioned, I never liked my placement of group 6 materialist on more than one subplane. And once I'd moved the other groups up and saw how group 6 materialist would be linked up with the psychic power of imagination, let's go to the senses, here it is, imagination, I thought it fit to have this group on that subplane. Though everyone can use their imagination, we only have power associated with our imaginations once we've been able to integrate our mind, emotions, and bodies to a certain degree so that what we imagine is more likely to manifest. Otherwise, it's just wishful thinking. That's what a lot of law attraction people are doing. They're not yet integrated personalities where they have the power to make that happen, let alone above group 6 level. And so they're just indulging in wishful thinking. They're not doing it logically or rationally, and they're often hurting themselves using those kinds of techniques if they're not doing it in a more illumined way. But when we're a group 6 materialist, we can make that happen. And what we imagine is more likely to manifest. For example, becoming a success in the material world requires a great deal of imagination. Successful Olympic athletes imagine and reimagine and reimagine and reimagine going down the slope that they're going to ski down, winning the medal, etc., etc., etc. It is a very methodical, scientific, planned out kind of method of imagination and the law of attraction. But then once we've achieved that success of money and power and enough to fulfill all our pleasures that we want, more imagination is required to decide what do we do with all that wealth, fame, power. Though the group 6 materialist uses the imagination for selfish personal gain, the group 6 aspirant will use it more in a humanitarian way, and I'm not going to talk about group 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. Here in this video. I'm just simply talking about why did this shift. I have other videos where I'll talk about that to come. Subscribe to this channel and you'll find out about them. Next, we will look at some of the changes I made in regards to the groups. So first of all, in my previous charts, I had her phrase accepting disciple associated with group 7. I have since switched that and associated the accepting disciple to group 8 here. So it's now labeled group 8 and not 7. And that is also now associated with the Chela name of accepted discipleship. My concerns for doing this, didn't have any. My rationale for doing this, group 8 is clearly about discipleship versus probationary discipleship. The accepting disciple in the Bailey books is accepting the disciplines of being a disciple more consistently and willingly than a group 7 probationary disciple. The probationary disciple is inconsistent, which is why they are on probation. They can't be trusted yet to really take up these disciplines in a reliable way on their own. So it made sense then to have the accepting disciple become group 8. Also in Dyna 1, page 717, it indicates that an accepting disciple comes after the first initiation. And because group 7 probationary disciples are said to be taking the first initiation, they go up to and just through the first initiation, I realized that an accepting disciple had to be part of group 8 and not group 7 because they come after the first initiation, and the probationary disciples are all about the process of taking the first initiation. Now let's look at some of the ways that I made adjustments to the Chela names. So what we're going to see here is a change where I have taken the Chela name phrase accepted disciple and associated it with pledged disciple. So here is the pledged disciple who's part of group 8, and I've associated it with the Chela name accepted disciple. My concerns for doing this, I don't have any. My rationale for doing this, I've long struggled what to do with the phrases pledged disciple and accepted disciple. The problem is the two names are in different categories. Accepted disciple is connected to the 6 Chela names, and pledged disciple is a name found generally elsewhere, especially in the books Discipleship in the New Age, volumes 1 and 2. Intuitively, it made sense to me that you are pledged before you are accepted. But I resolved the conflict by associating the accepted disciple Chela name both with the accepting and pledged disciple name, seen both as stages in learning to eventually arrive at being an accepted disciple. And you might also say that you are accepting and then they accept you because you've accepted enough of the disciplines, and now you're pledged to continue to do all those disciplines, and then you're accepted as having accomplished all of that. So maybe that's a way you can parse these words up. Again, these Bailey books are way too complex. So here's another big change I made with the Chela names, and that was moving them on to different subplanes than I had before. So the Chela on the thread, which was initially here, I have moved up to here, which is going to be on the third subplane of the mental plane. My concerns for doing this, I don't have any. The Chela on the thread is said to be learning how to attract the master's attention. Now, people need to become more aware that at times in the Bailey books, the word master is referring to one's own soul. If the Chela on the thread is on the third subplane, that puts it on the plane of the soul, the plane of the solar angel, and the higher mind. The Chela on the thread is also said to be responsive to what Bailey calls the higher psychic powers, which on the third subplane of the mental plane has to do with spiritual discernment. We started to develop discrimination here. Spiritual discernment, or viveka, is here. And Bailey again assigned these senses to these subplanes herself. The Chela on the thread is also holding a focused point of tension that is related to advanced stages of meditation. See the Soul to Spirit videos on understanding samadhi on this YouTube channel. Those meditations are about what to do to further their world service, and the thread of contact to the master, however you want to use that word, either master is your soul or as a master is something else, is said to never be used unless there is a need to get insights into one's service activity, which is becoming increasingly successful. Now that kind of parallels the Ken Wilber integral model idea. There's more people in integral than Ken Wilber that invented that, of I, we, it, and its that they have in that particular model there. And so Bailey has the internal processes going through the initiations and the external processes of having to become of service in the outer world. And the farther we go in the initiation or enlightenments or expansions of consciousness in the Bailey model, in Ken Wilber they call it tiers, but their tiers don't line up with the Bailey initiations, so don't confuse the two. They don't correlate. Though the terms are similar, they're different leaps in development, so to speak. But in the Bailey model, the more you're at the levels of second initiation, third initiation, and so forth, the more actual impact you will have on the outer world. I noticed as I was saying this that I said Bailey assigned. There are people, most people know that Bailey believes that most of her books, she was writing them through an intuitive telepathic connection with somebody she called the Tibetan. I have on my soultospirit.com channel a very popular article on who is Alice Bailey's Tibetan, really documented. Go there on the Soul to Spirit channel, put in who is Alice Bailey's Tibetan in the search button. You will find that. There is a reason I don't use the word Tibetan, and that is because I don't think it matters whether the Tibetan said it or Bailey said it. And as I'm trying to get these teachings out there, most people are really put off that don't know much about the Bailey teachings by the Tibetan said. Who is this person? I don't think it matters. I don't want to focus on who wrote it. Bailey, the Tibetan, I don't care, to be honest. I am concerned with what the model says and the value it has for us. And at the beginning of every Bailey book, there is a quote from this Tibetan that says, don't care about who I am, care about what I'm saying. So I take that quite literally. The next thing I did is the Chela in the aura moved from here up to the second subplane of the mental plane. And I don't have any concerns about doing that either. My rationale for doing it in the book Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, it says very clearly on page 754 that an initiated disciple is a Chela in the aura. Now, a lot of people aren't familiar with that phrase, initiated disciple. They're not familiar with accepting disciple, but those terms are in there. That's one of the services I've done, is help list all these terms so you understand where they're at. And it is said quite plainly that an initiated disciple is a Chela in the aura. So previously I had the initiated disciple associated with the Chela in the Master's heart. That clearly is a mistake. And finally, the Chela in the Master's heart is moved up to the first subplane of the mental plane. And I don't have any concerns for doing this either. And why did I do this? Because in the book Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, it clearly says on page 767 that an initiate is a Chela in the Master's heart. So I made another mistake there, and now I've corrected it. Now we're going to look at some of the changes I made on the chart regarding the initiations. So the first change I've made in this column is I have added the phrase to group 5, preparing to be an integrated personality. So here's group 5. Here's my phrase, preparing to be an integrated personality. My concerns about doing this is my invention, but it's based upon what I know about the Bailey teachings. My rationale for doing this is when it comes to an initiation or an expansion of consciousness, I have learned that Bailey has 3 phases in that process: preparation for the initiation, undergoing the initiation, and integrating the initiation. And though becoming an integrated personality, it's not really an initiation, I decided to borrow the 3 stages of initiation to the integrated personality process. Because as I see it, group 5 is nearing the phase of becoming an integrated personality, so I put the word preparation to indicate that. Now, I have books written on groups 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and an intro book, and I will be coming out with group 6 materialist and group 6 aspirant in the near future. Become a patron if you want to help support that endeavor. So following along those same lines, here we have the group 6 materialists now labeled as going through the process of becoming an integrated personality, and I put it in the initiations column. And my concerns about doing this is becoming an integrated personality is not really an initiation. It's more of a milestone. The first initiation happens as we're working our way into the mental plane and then moving up to from the lower plane up towards the plane of the solar angel or the higher plane. And my rationale for doing this is I just didn't want to create another column called milestones. So I put it in here, and I will continue to teach people that this is not really an initiation. And if people really don't like it, maybe I'll do another column called milestones. It's just the chart is getting so big anyway. So following this same line of putting in the stage of becoming an integrated personality and breaking it into 3 parts, I have the group 6 aspirant, who is now labeled as integrating the integrated personality phase and preparing for the first initiation. And I've put that under the initiations column here. And again, my concern is this is my invention, my rationale for doing it. I'm continuing to follow up on those 3 stages: preparation, initiation, integration. And note, I've watched documentaries on highly successful people that I call group 6 materialist or integrated personalities who become disillusioned with their wealth, money, fame, power, and wonder, is there more to life? And I feel that that disillusionment phase, as they're starting to become a group 6 aspirant, is like them integrating the pros and cons of becoming an integrated personality. Now we're going to look at some changes made in the techniques column. So the main difference here is I have added the word unity from the Eclairf model up into the Boudic plane, and that is why I put in the Boudic plane level, because I believe that this part of the Eclairf model, and the words for the Eclairf model are here under the techniques, really goes up into the Boudic plane. And I don't have any concerns about doing this either. My rationale for doing it, under the column called techniques in the previous chart, you see the different categories for technique of integration, technique of fusion, then duality, but the final technique of unity was missing because it was on the Boudic plane. So in this version, I added the Boudic plane in so you could see that final technique. And again, the techniques are, first and foremost, you have the technique of integration. And that includes integration, alignment, and then you have a crisis. Then you have the technique of, that also includes light. Then you have the technique of fusion, that includes revelation. And then you have the technique of fusion, which includes fusion. Then you have the technique of duality. Then you have the technique of unity. And to get all the techniques in there, I had to add the Boudic plane. Now let's look at changes made in the rules column. So I have reassigned where I think the rules in initiation, human, and solar, and the rules raise and initiation belong on the subplanes and on this chart. And the first change I've made is that I now believe that group 6 aspirants should be assigned to initiation, human, and solar rules 1 and 2. My concerns about doing this: the rules in the Initiation, Human, and Solar book are plainly stated as applying to probationary disciples. So I'm fudging it here, perhaps by associating the first few rules with aspirants. But here's my rationale for doing this. As you can watch on the Soul to Spirit YouTube channel, in the past few years, I've taken time to do a video lecture for each of the Initiation, Human, and Solar 14 rules. And after I looked at how the rules might also apply to Group 6 aspirants, it was my opinion that Rule 1, about learning how to lead with love, and Rule 2, about wanting to serve the greater good, fit with what a Group 6 aspirant is like. So that is why I've assigned these first two rules to the Group 6 aspirant in this chart. So another change I've made is that I now believe that the Group 7 probationary disciples who are little Chelas are working on rules 3 to 7 in the Initiation, Human, and Solar book. Now, little Chela, I believe, covers both part of the Group 6 aspirant stage as well as part of Group 7 probationers. Group 7 probationers can also be, I believe, in my understanding of the material, Chelas in the light. So there are different stages here according to the Chela names. But the Group 7 probationary disciples who are still working on little Chelaship, I believe, are working on rules 3 through 7. And I don't really have any concerns about doing this. My rationale for doing it is, again, after doing a video for each of the Initiation, Human, and Solar 14 rules, it made sense that practicing rules 3 to 7 was more for probationers who were little Chelas. I'm saying this because rules 3 through 5 emphasize more wanting to purify oneself more physically, as well as wanting to know the soul. Rule 6 emphasizes diet, and Rule 7 asks us to start to control the sex drive. Now, if you notice, by association and correlation, that means that Group 7 is on, that are probationer little Chelas, is on the 7th subplane of the mental plane. Now, the 7th subplane of the mental plane, by correlation, is associated with the physical plane. And so these rules are more about physical disciplines. And that's one reason I thought that this rationale worked. And again, this emphasis on diet, purification, and sexuality all seem more 7th subplane of the mental plane connected because the 7th subplane is associated with the 7th physical plane. On any plane, you can make those correlations. Now let's look at some of the changes regarding the column on the petals. So here's the biggest change. Groups 1 through 6 are now associated with the knowledge petal only. In previous charts, you will see that I have different petal names listed in this column for these groups, but now they're all knowledge petal latent. My concerns for doing this: I'm not sure yet that what I've done is totally accurate in the petals column. Of all the columns, the egoic lotus, i.e. soul petals, are what I have struggled with the most. The problem is that there are conflicting texts about how the egoic lotus petals unfold, making it hard for me to sort out when they start to have an effect. Some texts infer that all soul groups are connected to the egoic lotus petals, from Lemurian consciousness onwards. Other texts say that the knowledge petals unfold only as we get to group 7 probationary disciples and move on to the mental plane. Then there are references to aspirants having knowledge petals unfold, which could mean, as she does, it's not group 6 aspirants, it's all aspirants, everybody on the spiritual path. Keeping this in mind, I am still uncertain that my latest conclusions are accurate. But my rationale for doing this is right now I am playing with the idea that the knowledge petals are linked to groups 1 to 6, but only in a latent way. I am theorizing that the soul has to be connected to all soul groups, but only fully unfolds once we become group 7 probationary disciples and beyond. For this reason, I'm using the phrase latent, meaning there is a connection like a closed bud, but no opening of the petals as of yet. And you've made it to my final change on the chart. We're almost to the end of this video. And the final change is that the petals are now sorted 1 per subplane from the group 6 materialist upward to the group 9 initiate. So to orient you here, we have the group 6 materialist who is working on the knowledge petal starting to unfold. The group 6 aspirant is working on the knowledge love petal. And the probationary disciple is working on the final of the knowledge petals. It says the knowledge petals unfold with the probationary disciple. So obviously some of this is unfolding for the probationary disciple, but it just made sense to me as I understand the stages of little Chela ship, group 6 aspirant, all these terms together, that there is the beginnings of knowledge, unfolding here, knowledge, love, because the aspirant is starting to have some love for humanity happen. And the probationary disciple is starting to make some sacrifices happen in regards to their knowledge. And I'm not going to get into more specific explanations of these petals here. We'd be here forever. I'll probably do a video on the knowledge petals. Subscribe to this channel. All the soul petals. Subscribe to this channel if you want to learn more about that. And then what we have is an unfolding of the petals in a nice, neat order going up to the love knowledge, the love, the love sacrifice, the sacrifice knowledge, the sacrifice love, and the sacrifice petals with the 3 central petals. There's 12 petals, 9 outer, 3 inner. The 3 central petals having to do with the Buddhic plane and probably the Atmic plane as well. I just haven't put the Atmic plane in this chart. So, what are my concerns about doing this? I confess this is a change that I have made that I have the most concerns with. As a reminder, I've just said there are 9 outer petals and 3 inner petals that protect the jewel in the lotus that is essentially the monad. And it makes sense that the 3 inner petals are the triad, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, and that leaves me with 9 petals to distribute on the various subplanes. Now, maybe more than one petal belongs on more than one subplane. I'm totally open to that. But my rationale for doing this is group 6 materialists, as I've said, have a high degree of intelligence. It's chemomonastic. It's often distorted. It's more like scientism than science, still heavily colored by biases. And it's mainly selfish in orientation and still influenced strongly by the world of the 5 senses and desire. But it just felt like knowledge is happening at that level. And as I just said, group 6 aspirants are starting to develop some love with their knowledge. And so that love has got a lot of selfishness in it, and that just felt like it fit with the knowledge love petal. And after these assertions, I simply listed 1 petal per each subplane, but in all honesty, this may change in time, and this is the only column that I still have reservations about at this point. So you've made it to the end of this video. And in conclusion, this now 8-year project of mine is almost nearing completion. There's only one level, that of the petals, that I need to work out more thoroughly. All the other levels I'm increasingly confident about, but as you never know, you may find those few paragraphs or few pages that will change everything. So I'm still open to that. But as you work with this chart, please feel free to share your insights. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is it working for you? Is it not working for you? I would love to have your comments so long as they're respectful, and I tend to comment back. And again, my main goal for doing this is I hope it helps you simplify this very complex model of spiritual development. Love and light, Lisa.